I'd love to help, but I just don't know what to say or what to do. Well, I'm sure you can identify with those statements. When friends, neighbours or colleagues experience the death of someone they cared about, our hearts go out to them. We long to bring some comfort or assistance, and yet we're never quite sure how to go about it. Should I talk about what has happened or talk about more pleasant topics? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I do something and someone cries or becomes emotional? It all feels so awkward. Perhaps, you may conclude, it might just be as well to leave them alone. And yet this may be the worst thing of all.
I started to realize with the way people dealt with me that people are really uncomfortable with death, especially since there are many people who don't practice a religion anymore, where religion does talk about death, but day-to-day life, people are talking about what you should be buying, not what you should be doing when somebody dies.
Losing someone you care about can be one of the most difficult experiences of life. What compounds the problem is that shortly after the time of the funeral, grieving people often feel abandoned, wondering if people really care. Most do, of course, but out of discomfort with not knowing what to say or to do, they often avoid the situation.
The staff at the hospital were all as shocked as us that this had happened, because it hadn't been something that anyone was anticipating. It felt as if these nurses were all flapping around us, trying to think of consoling things to say. I know what the nurses were doing and saying was their way of trying to console us, and everything was because they meant well. Not all of it was very helpful. What I found to be very helpful is people who just encourage me to talk about my dad. Sometimes that might mean I get upset, but it's very hard when people don't talk about him. I went to a party at New Year's Eve, which obviously the first New Year's Eve without my dad was a difficult time, and we stayed with very good friends of ours, and I would have expected them to have talked about Dad, and they didn't mention him. Nothing was said. I just felt very lonely. I felt like nobody understood, and I found it very hard to enjoy myself, because it was like I had to try and be somebody else. I couldn't be the person who just lost her dad, because that would spoil the party.
Because we do not talk about it in our death-denying culture, grief often catches us completely by surprise. Since we haven't learned what to expect, the intensity, longevity, and the unpredictability of the process can catch us unawares. Many people, days, weeks, or even months after the actual death, may actually feel like they're going crazy. They may be feeling worse a few weeks later than they did at the time. Sadly, it's when others think they should be getting themselves together that the grieving person often feels like they're falling apart, and they may not know where to turn. Each one of us has enormous potential to help a grieving person, although helping takes more than good intentions. William Shakespeare once wrote, "Everyone can master a grief, but he that has it." And certainly it's easier to talk about grief from the spectator's gallery. Therefore, we will learn from the words that grieving people shared about their experience. So here are 10 simple suggestions to help us know what to do. My ideas are complemented by some helping principles and some quotes from grieving people themselves. Be there. Sometimes we're concerned about what we can do to assist others, when simply the best help is simply to be there. After my wife died, I remember very little of what people said or did. What I do remember is that certain people were there for me. The gift of presence is one of the greatest things you can give to a person in grief, and should never be underestimated.
Just being there, just, have a cup of tea. Don't make visits spread out. Well, I was getting myself into a terrible mess over waiting on them to call me. I was getting myself angry at them for perhaps not thinking, well, I'll see what Margaret's doing.
If there's one thing I would say to anyone going through grief, and that is this: talk about it. Get help. Get professional help, and lean on your friends. When I say lean on them, your friends want to be leaned on. They want to help you, but they're afraid sometimes to approach you if you're an individual that doesn't want to talk about it. It's extremely difficult for someone to approach you and say, how can I help you, when you don't want to talk about it.
Some may downplay the importance of just being there. Don't. It means more to the person than you will ever realize. Don't worry about what you should say. What can you say that is going to make it all better? No words are sufficient. So just let the person know you care by your presence.
Make a point of calling even if you do not have anything to talk about. The content is not important. Even a visit, a note, or a regular phone call will let me know I am not forgotten.
We may worry whether our assistance is wanted, but grieving people are usually very open to receiving help and tend to reach out to whatever help is offered. Because they perceive that support must come from outside of themselves, your approach will probably be welcomed. So don't wait or hesitate.
Just being there, asking how you're doing, giving a few little things like making food, because a grieving person, even though he is the greatest or she is the greatest cook and all that, their life has turned upside down. So the basic necessities of shopping, cleaning the house, cooking for them, I think would be wonderful for a grieving person, because it just gets over that little hump till they get on track back again.
Don't just support the person for the days of the funeral or for a short time afterwards.
I wish people would have kept more in touch, called more often during that year. I felt after the first few weeks there was an emptiness. It was almost deafening.
Many grieving people feel abandoned after a short while when people don't call or follow through on promised visits. Grieving people remember these offers and feel hurt when they're not fulfilled. Keep in touch from time to time, especially on weekends, or at times you know will be particularly difficult.
So when Michael passed away, these people were there. They understood. It wasn't a shock to them. It was a shock that he passed away, of course. But how to deal with it and how to deal with me, and knowing what the illness was all about, was a great help, because they were well educated on the illness. They provided a tremendous comfort, just being there for me. Just saying, Fred, we're here for you. And it gave me the opportunity, when they said that, to allow me to speak more and more and more. And they listened and they listened. And they called me the day after and they listened again. And that was the greatest therapy I can possibly have and still have today.
So our first principle: better to call too soon and have to call back later than to call too late. Our second suggestion: we need to listen. Let one lady describe her experience in the weeks after the death of her husband.
Alone in my house, I longed for someone to call. I watched from the window, hoping that every car that slowed down and every set of footsteps was someone coming to visit. Anyone would have done. I wanted to talk. But when they came, they seemed to talk about every other subject than the one most on my mind. Then I longed just as strongly that they would leave.
Grieving people need to talk. And for that to happen, someone has to be willing to listen.
Be there, listen well, and let your heart speak. Because, you know, sometimes the logical thing isn't that logic at all. You have to be able to open up to somebody else's problems. Then your own, so all of a sudden they're not unique. And if you help them, somehow help comes back to you.
I think the most helpful thing is to give the person who is grieving an opportunity to talk. And sometimes people have said to me, I know, it's terrible, isn't it? It's unfair. And it's actually better for someone to just say that than to try and console you with, oh, well, he had a good life or something like that. Because, yes, he had a good life, but he could have had a longer life. So it's better when people just let you talk and just agree with you.
That may mean listening to the same stories and events over and over again.
I just want you to listen to me. I just want to talk, even though I might tell you the same story over and over again.
And I worried myself so much that people were going to get fed up looking at me, and they were going to get fed up, oh my gosh, don't talk to her, she cries. Other people seem to get great pleasure out of seeing you crying, and other people seem to want to make you cry. They'd say things that you know darn well has to be offensive. Like myself, if I started to talk to someone and I thought I was upsetting them, I would have to turn my topic around a little bit and make it seem a little more light, a little more appropriate. But some people just go on and on and on, and you look at them, and I know I'm looking at them vacant, and I know I'm saying, you know, why don't you just be quiet? That's not what I want to hear right now. Sometimes nothing said is better than a whole lot. As long as you know that people are comfortable with you and they want to be with you and just sit and have a cup of tea or have a chat or do what you need to do. And if I want to talk about Jim, then that's totally different. Because some people I can cry with and I don't have any inhibitions at all.
Repetition is an important tool which enables the grieving person to come to terms with what at first seems unbelievable. So our second principle, if you are doing most of the talking, you may not be helping. Our third suggestion, don't treat the person differently. When people are grieving, others often unconsciously react to them in ways that don't seem natural.
They invited me towards the end of the year to their places, but they had a hard time coming over to my place. I wish they would have come over to my house because I'm still there. I'm still living.
You can support a grieving person today very simply by talking. Don't hide it. Don't hide it. There are so many people out there that have lost loved ones and are afraid to talk about it. The fact that you can open up and discuss it. There's a world of help out there, and I don't mean just from professionals, but from every person that you speak to. They all have their own story that you can share and help.
We may try to protect them or treat them as if we were walking on eggshells.
Please don't treat me differently. Act natural. Don't be afraid to mention the person's name. I want to talk about the person and the relationship we shared. So don't change the subject if you see me cry.
When something changes in someone's life, that person struggles to hold on to what one still has or is. People don't change, even when situations or circumstances change. So try to be natural. If you used to joke with this person, or if you enjoyed a good discussion or a debate, do what you always did. This will help them to know that you're regarding them the same as before. And so our third principle, people don't change just because circumstances do. Our fourth suggestion: help the person to remember, not to forget. It can sometimes take months for the reality that someone has gone to sink in. What helps people work through the grieving process is when others are willing to allow them to talk. Reality comes by repetition. The griever needs repeated opportunities to talk about and process the many different feelings about their loss and its consequences.
Tell me your stories, the humorous incidents that happened, and the things you appreciated about them. When my son's business colleagues shared their stories, I was very touched and felt very proud. It helped me see another side of my son. Tell the stories of the person you knew, for that may help me gain insights I never had.
Giving words to sorrow is important. So we need to encourage the verbalization of feelings and the reliving of memories. Admittedly, just talking about even the wonderful times of the relationship can be painful, but the opportunity to review those memories over and over can be helpful. It is by repeatedly reviewing these circumstances that the finality of the death is eventually accepted. This enables the person to put the past into perspective, which is what they have to do before they are able to turn their attention to the future. And so our fourth principle: grief invites us to remember, not to forget. Suggestion number 5: make a specific offer of help. Please don't ask people to let you know if they can help. They don't know what they need right now. And probably, let's think about it, they wouldn't call even if they did.
I found I had a complete lack of strength. For 6 months, I had no energy. And when I realized I did not seem able to do ordinary things, I panicked. All I could think was, help!
Most of us are usually not very good at asking for help. So try to assess, what might this person in this situation need right now? And say to them, can I come and do this for you? Be specific. And even if that's refused, call again later with some other definite suggestion.
Don't say, we must get together sometime. If you mean it, be definite.
Our fifth principle: what might I want or need if I were in this situation? Our sixth suggestion: let your care and concern show. Don't be afraid to show your own emotions at the loss. Being strong for the person may appear to them like you don't care. You can say, I find this difficult, or I'm not sure what to say. Your grief at the situation normalizes their grief. But on the other hand, you need to ensure that your reaction is a direct response to the present situation and not a reflection of your own personal issues.
When some people came to visit, they would tell me their story about some aunt that died years before. Frankly, I didn't have the energy. I have enough to think about with my own grief, so I wasn't really interested when people told me about theirs.
Often seeing a grieving person can remind us of our own losses. Remember, you are there to help someone deal with their grief, not deal with your own over this or some previous loss. Make sure that the emotions you are showing are for the griever's benefit and not your own. And so our principle: even if they do not respond today, people will remember that you cared enough to ask. Suggestion number 7: accept them unconditionally as wounded people. Grief is like a wound that needs time and attention to heal. For the individual, it may feel like a part of them is missing. They may be experiencing many unusual and uncharacteristic emotions and reactions. Let them know what is normal through books and resources about grief.
The world moves so fast, but I've slowed down a bit. Be patient. People seem in such a hurry to get me back to normal. Don't rush me. I'm going as fast as I can.
The grieving person may look to see if we understand, or if we're willing to accept them as hurting before they share their hearts with us.
It's nice for people who don't know you so well just to say, I'm sorry for your loss. And that's just nice that people recognize it and acknowledge it. I think that people acknowledging your loss is really important. And for people who are closer to you, I think that when they are sensitive to and recognize the fact that you are going through these changes, maybe be a little more sensitive to certain subjects, like Christmas, for example, or take you out, like let's do something special because I know it's your brother's birthday or stuff like that.
Accept them just as they are. Don't try to fix everything. They're not looking for answers or solutions at this point. Let them know they have your permission to grieve, and that you're willing to accept them in their weakness and in their vulnerability. Interpret normal behavior, letting the person know that even though their reactions may seem strange and uncharacteristic to them, that there's a reason for it. You see, legitimizing the grief process and the associated reactions is often the greatest gift that we can give. So consider principle number 7. Your attitude speaks volumes. But our 8th suggestion is this: we need to be realistic about the help that we can offer. While there's a lot that you can do to help, you can't rectify the situation that's causing the grief.
Try to understand what I've lost. Not only have I lost someone I cared about, I have lost a relationship, someone who cared about me. I've lost my hopes and dreams and many other things. Sometimes it feels like I have lost everything. I know I haven't, but it feels like I have.
Often, what the grieving person wants the most is the return of that which is lost. And that's the one thing that we cannot do.
Whatever you do is nice, and I appreciate it. Yet you need to understand that it's only a small help because I've lost something, and all I really want is to have it back.
The best you can do is to make the experience better than it might have been if you hadn't been there. The person may seem angry, seemingly at all kinds of things, but usually what they're really angry about is that their loved one has died and there's nothing they or anyone else can do about it. Because you cannot change the situation and bring the person back, you may have to occasionally tolerate angry responses. Please remember, the person isn't angry at you. It's just easier to focus anger on a living person who's a convenient target than to direct anger where it really belongs. Now, admittedly, it's easier to express that principle than it is to experience it. You may be hurt by misdirected anger or unkind comments, but hopefully you will care enough to see that the person's floundering and probably will later regret saying these things and be thankful that you were willing to be so understanding. Our 8th principle: no one rises higher than when they reach out and lend a hand to someone who is down. Our 9th suggestion: be aware of difficult days. Please remember that grief doesn't come all at once. And often those special days like holidays, birthdays, anniversary, Christmas can be particularly difficult.
I was disappointed because I don't think a lot of people who haven't lost somebody don't realize that you want people to recognize these days.
The grieving person may miss the opportunity to do something special for a loved one on their birthday. And even on the griever's birthday, it can be difficult to realize there won't be a card or a gift from that person. Anniversary occasions and days like Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, or Christmas can present their own struggles. Even those a year ago today days can bring back many memories.
No one mourns exactly the way I do. I need to do what is right for me right now. So if it seems I'm not doing so well today, why not ask me what I am feeling? Maybe there's a reason why I'm having a bad day.
How can you help support the person on these days? Well, a card, a phone call, a visit, an invitation to go out for lunch or coffee can not only ease the unhappiness, but can also reassure them that they're not forgotten. Sometimes the anticipation of these special occasions can be even worse than the day itself, and the times before or after can be emotional. And so our 9th principle, grief comes and goes. Just because someone seems to be doing better today doesn't mean that grief won't flare up again later. And my final suggestion, we need to continue our support throughout the grief process. What can people do to help themselves, or what can we do to help other people going through grief?
Find somebody to talk to. I think that's probably having somebody that's willing to listen to you and have you tell your story 1,000 times.
And or maybe you have the word listen is important, because many counselors start right into talking, and then the grieving person just sits and listens instead of them having a chance to talk.
You need to have somebody to listen to what you have to say. And the journaling too is another thing I think is very helpful. If you're because there may be times when you can't talk to somebody, being able to journal I think is a really important. Write down your feelings.
I think having support from family, friends, and whoever is very, very important. I also believe having hope in the future. You may not feel it when you're grieving, but knowing that there is a future, holding on to that hope. Bill says that oftentimes, and I truly believe that you need to hold on to the hope that times will be better, even though you can't see it in the depths of grief.
I would say honor. Honor the meaning of the relationship and feel what you need to feel. Say what you need to say. Don't let anybody tell you what that is, but honor the memory of the relationship. Honor that relationship.
Find a counselor, because a good ear normally dries up after a couple of months, and you may need to be telling your story for a couple of years. So find a good counselor who will be prepared to walk with you through that process. I think the honoring of the memory is really important, especially in terms of just being free to feel what you feel and not needing to apologize for it and not letting anyone dictate to you as to when certain things should happen. So I remember inviting some folks in, because the church too was grieving, to let them help do some stuff, and they go, "Oh, her stuff is still, it's time to give it away." I said, "Really? Who said so?" Right? So there's no agenda. Just go with what you feel. And thirdly, I'd say, in terms of this whole sense of hope for the future, just go one day, one step at a time. Today you might get up and take 10 steps. Tomorrow you may get up and take none. But that's all right. Not hold yourself to some high expectation that every day I gotta do all this stuff. Just get up and be, but just get up. Get out of bed, do something, and at the end of the day you might take half a step, but that's all right. But go one day, one step at a time.
And I think also that there's no time frame for grief, that we like to conveniently think that there's at the end of the year or maybe in 6 months, but there's no time frame. Everybody's grief journey takes different amounts of time depending on what the loss was and how they're dealing with it and what that person meant to them. All those things that come into play, but people get, well, gosh, I should be over this by now. What's still wrong with me? And they just, are feeling so encumbered with it that I think allowing people to understand that it's not a time-bound kind of a process.
Grief takes time. When people ask me, how long does the grief process last? I have two answers. First, it always takes longer than people who haven't been through it seem to think. But second, there's no time limit, and people need to take the time they need to work through all of their grief issues. Truly, it ain't over till it's over. The problem is that often the support that people receive at the time of the death can all too quickly dissipate as people return to their lives and their normality.
What I've tried to do to help myself is to go out more, to do the things we used to do, to socialize, to get help wherever and whenever is offered. I found that really helped me through this process. I went for grief counseling. I actually initiated some of my friends to go out. I went into sports to be around people. I've gone back to work.
If you will make a commitment to support this person for at least 1 year, through all the challenges of that year, they will know that they have a true and understanding friend in you. For it will take a whole year of firsts. The first birthday, the first Christmas, the first anniversary, the first everything for the grieving individual to work through. You may not need to call them every day or every single week of that year, but there will be specific times. Grief support is a long-term commitment, and there's always a cost to that, which you need to decide if you are willing to pay. But the rewards of seeing someone come through a difficult situation and finding life again, priceless. Perhaps you've heard the following story. Early one day, a man was walking along the seashore, enjoying the fresh sea air and the sunshine. He noticed that during the night, many starfish had washed up on the beach. After walking a mile or so, he saw a little girl methodically picking up starfish and tossing them back into the water. After observing her for a few minutes, he asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm throwing starfish back into the ocean," the girl replied, "because if I leave them on the beach, the sun will dry them and they will die, and I want them to live." Well, the man was touched by her consideration, but he motioned up and down the miles and miles of beach he just walked and said, "There must be millions of starfish along here. How can you, one little girl, possibly expect to make a difference?" The young girl thought for a moment, and then she reached down and carefully picked up another starfish, looked at it for a moment, and then threw it gently into the surf. She turned to the man and smiled. "You may be right," she said, "but I made a difference for that one." While you may not be able to change the world or rescue all those who need to be liberated, but can you make a difference for that one? Never, ever underestimate the difference that you can make when you care enough to reach out and pick someone up and help to get them back to where they need to be.